Welcome to the archive, Langdon.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So let's start with where were you born and when?
I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan on February 11th, 1939. That's what everybody says. I don't remember that occasion, but... And so Ann Arbor was my home. My dad was a professor there at teaching Oriental art at the University of Michigan, one of the Big Ten schools. And let's see, I went to Everbaugh Elementary School, which was a city public school. And then high school for me was University High School, which was a part of the University of New Hampshire Department of Education, and University of New Hampshire, University of Michigan Department of Education. Now, I don't know if it was a lab school or not, but we did have, different students and different student teachers there, but, yeah.
So what was that like, growing up in the 40s? Was a day-to-day life like?
Well, I rode my bike everywhere. That was my transportation. And, had to have a Raleigh bike was what we wanted to get, because those were 3-speed and they were geared in the hubs, not what didn't change the chain position as on the bikes they have now for the multi-speed bikes. So at any rate, that was the thing to do. Saddle baskets, and so of course University of Michigan was very prevalent in Ann Arbor, so I could ride up there easily. I could ride to school easily. I don't know, it was a slower pace. I didn't get involved in sports, particularly at school, but I got involved in drama. Not acting. No way. But we designed sets, built sets, painted sets, put sets in, did all kinds of stuff with the lighting, and was stage manager 2 or 3 plays that we put on. And I think probably the best I took away from that was an understanding that the show's not going to go on without the behind-the-scene support. I mean, the curtain's not going to open, okay? No lights. So I was very comfortable with that, being in a supportive role. But I would never particularly want to act at that point. I was still shy, And that was good. It got me some socialization, working with the students, and what I like to do. Of course, I was in the industrial arts class at the time. I always liked to do things and see how man made things, generic man, and did things. So that worked well. And so eventually, as time progressed and we were growing up, I probably spent a lot of time with my 3 closest buddies, Duncan and John and Mac. And what was interesting about it, 2 of us, Duncan and Mac, went to Ann Arbor High School, and 2 of us, myself and John, went to the University High School. So we had slightly different schedules, but that's what we did there. So we'd spend time, and of course, eventually, we got in a car here or there. My first car was a 50 Mercury convertible, ragtop. Boy, did I think that was hot stuff. So, at any rate, and let's see. Mac had a Chevy, I think, or John had a Chevy. And at any rate, somebody had a Chevy sedan, the other had a Chevy coupe. So we were trying to get ready around the end of the school year, prom time and thus and so. See about we could run over. John was not there. John was going to go to the prom. Okay, so we kept figuring out if we could jack up the back of the car and put a block under there quickly, so he'd come out after the prom and jump in and start it up, and it wouldn't go anywhere. We thought that was really great. Well, I know. So Mac had the sedan, so we tried it out in his car. Well, his clutch was not in good shape, so when he got it spinning so fast, the particles in there, the clutch plates, actually were cracked, so they spread out, and of course filled in the space. So he had no clutch at all, and it just you couldn't. He had to start it up, and it would run right away. There's no way of stopping it because the clutch wouldn't work. So anyway, we fixed that. But those are things you get involved with puttering around, doing stuff like that.
Yeah. So were cars back then, like, you get one used and basically it was up to the kids to fix them?
Yeah, a lot of people did a lot of their own work. They were much simpler to start off with. You'd open the hood, and you had an engine, and you could see the ground underneath. You do that today, and you don't know where the ground is, because it was the vehicles were I'll say simpler, and there was gas station and garages on almost every corner. I mean, somebody would open a gas station, and it's also a service station. So that was that way. I remember groceries. My mother would buy groceries, and once in a while she could call the store and have them delivered. You know, they just would do that, or they'd put them up for you before. So all that stuff's happening now. Everybody's thinking it's wonderful. It's it's happened before. Most families would have one car, and especially during the war. Many families didn't have a car at all, and
Because of the cost of war?
because all the effort went to the war. The war effort, yes. I mean, we recycled cans. You had in that day you'd wash them out. You take the label off. You take both ends off, and you crush them. Stomp on them, and that effort went to the war. You have 4 tires instead of 5 as a spare because that much of the rubber would go to the war effort, and probably what people were living on didn't work into the availability of having an automobile. They were used a lot, but Ann Arbor had bus transportation, had taxi cabs. So I'm trying to think how large a town or city it was.
Was it like a small city?
Yeah, a small city, because now if I go back, what was all open fields around the city is all part of Ann Arbor now, all built up, So it's like, Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor where there was farms between. Now in Indiana, you just drive down the highway and you're in the next town. Yeah. Just the way how development has gone. Yeah. So there's that.
Were people growing their food mostly back then?
Yes, a lot of people did grow food. Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, yeah. Yeah. You go out, and, I don't think many people in the city had chickens and things like that. Yeah. But you had small farms around, and you'd had, of course, the farmer markets too. Yeah, that went on. Of course, the trains. There was a nice, beautiful train station in Ann Arbor, which is now a restaurant, called the Gandy Dancer. But a lot of freight and passenger service. From New York to Detroit or whatever. That was again. So there was a lot of public transportation available. Easy to access. You didn't have to wonder how am I going to get to the station, because there's probably a bus or a cab you could get. Didn't have Uber and those kinds of things, but you did call for a cab. Thinking fellow calls a yellow. That's what it used to say on them. And radios. I had a radio, but and nobody had TV initially, of course, because they hadn't until it was invented, and then TV came in slowly. Somebody in the neighborhood would get a TV, and everybody would go over and watch it and say, "Oh, wow!" Eventually, most families had them, but I don't recall.
What was the first time you saw a TV?
That's a good question. Had to be coming along, and I just don't know. We're always out puttering. I mean, TV was not a part of our life as it is now, if I can say it that way. I got to go see the such and such show. We're too busy tinkering on stuff and doing things, and
working on your house.
Yeah, and then of course when I had my car, that's when I discovered junkyards, because you need parts. One thing the convertible has got to have is a spotlight. So out to the junkyard, I got a spotlight, installed that. I got seat covers out there and everything. I mean, that really opened my eyes to, there's a whole treasure out there. But again, that's because you putter a lot, and
So was that kind of like the normal activity that people would do? Is they would go places to find things to do, or to go get parts for something, or
Well, maybe, or a lot of times you go for a drive or for a picnic somewhere. I mean, remember in New Hampshire, it's when I was in college, so that was 50s and 60s. We'd pack a pick and lunch and go up see the old man or the flume or something, and so made a day trip out of it. And of course, again, well, yeah, the superhighways weren't in there. The thing I haven't talked about is we came to New Hampshire every summer. My folks bought the Plumer Farm in 1941, so it's been 80 years now. And most of those summers I was there. So I do that even now. I go to Hillsborough in the summer. So that meant driving from Michigan to New Hampshire, which is 800 miles. It was a 3-day trip because speed limit was 45 miles an hour. Because the roads were similar to, it's 27 here. It goes it goes further. It's the old 101. You can tell by the thump, 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 thump. It was a concrete road. It went all the way to Keene, New Hampshire. Still does, but not exactly on the safe pavement. So the roads were not, and I always talk about a New Hampshire straight ahead. Well, you just can't go fast speeds because it's more like a slalom. So at any rate, and then we would stay in those days. My mother had friends in Rochester, New York, a classmate. So we'd stop and stay overnight with them. And then after driving across Canada, then we drive across New York State somewhere and maybe stay a second night someplace in what they call tourist homes. Today they're called bed and breakfasts. And there was lots of little cabins. Sometimes you go up north, you can see some places where there are a lot of little cabins built there. And so people would you rent a cabin, which I think basically was a room. I don't think there's any refrigeration or cooking, and certainly no air conditioning. Well, what was that, You just open the window and hope there's going to be a breeze. So cabins were very popular.
So it didn't come with like a little stove or fireplace for you to cook on or anything?
Might be, yep. Sometimes a little outside, yeah.
So you just go outside?
Sometimes they had little fireplaces inside. I mean, yeah.
You just step outside and there'd be a little.
Yeah, they had. I can't remember. It had to have some sort of facility with running water for bathrooms. So, although the rustic type, you just have a cabin, a place to sleep. That's about it.
And those were popular back then.
Oh yes. Well, you see, we would go on Route 20 across New York State. This is before the thruway was built. Route 20 is still there. It's a very beautiful ride, but long. I mean, some of the hills are 2 miles long, going up or coming down. And I remember Dad always pumping the brakes, saying to us, "Don't lean on the brakes because you don't want to get them too hot." And excuse me. So New York State, yeah, okay. So we'd stay in Rochester. I remember that because that was a beautiful home, and marble in the bathroom, large bathroom, probably almost as big as this room, and my mother's friend's mother would get up early in the morning to make biscuits or oatmeal or whatever else, and they'd have a old-fashioned breakfast. I mean, you'd have everything on the table, yeah.
So like biscuits, bacon, fruit, eggs.
Yeah, yes, exactly, yeah.
Okay. Was it, like nowadays, you can go to a grocery store and you can get like 20 different types of coffee and 8 different kinds of bacon.
Yes.
Were some of these things back then like really hard to come by in terms of like getting oatmeal, or is that really popular food?
I don't, I wasn't the one buying the groceries. I don't recall any difficulty in getting food at that time. Mm-hmm. Stores were smaller because they didn't have 19 different kinds of cereal. Yeah, for instance, or how it's. Yeah. Or because they've got this product now, then they make the new and improved product, but they still have the old one. The next thing you know, they got 10 different products. And that's more shelf space. So, and of course, not as many people to serve, but.
How How was like food storage back then, or like traveling with food? Did you guys just have like one thermos or one?
We'd have a thermos bottle and I forgot what we had for coolers back then. I think they were, as I would recall, it'd be something like a metal box inside a metal box with some cardboard or something for insulation, so it really didn't keep long, but it would keep cool for the day. So if you had a picnic lunch, it'd be perfect. Well, when you go back far enough, before refrigeration came along.
And was this in your?
No. Let's see. When we came in, I'm thinking about the farm and also modern. The farm, we never have had electricity up there, so we had actually an old-fashioned ice box. You put a block of ice in, we'd go down to the girls' camp, and get a block of ice out of sawdust, rinse it off. I mean, still amazes me how sawdust and ice keeps. Of course, you've got a lot of ice, but at any rate, and then you'd put that chunk in the top of the box, which kept it cool. It really wasn't. I mean, you didn't keep milk, for instance, for a long time. So I suspect you didn't have as much to keep refrigerated again as we do now, because we can put everything plus the kitchen sink in the refrigerator. And again, if you got a family, everybody likes something different. Back in the days, you probably all have one kind of maybe lemonade, and on special days you might have something extra, or parties. But things were just I'll say simpler again. But I mean, Sears and Roebuck's were all over the place. Montgomery Ward too. Those kinds of department stores, Macy's and those kinds of stores were not in. They were in New York.
Yeah.
You'd have to go to those places. But
What were those department stores like?
Well, they were really department stores, organized by departments. Women's, and even as things are organized now, men's apparel, hardware. And many of them were multiple floors. So you'd have, a whole building, but several floors. But not being, again, everybody didn't go shopping back then. I, on the other hand, would go to Sears and Roebuck and get what I needed, and then came back. Let's talk about light bulbs for a minute. I remember in Ann Arbor, we would take a burned out bulb to the light company, and they'd exchange it for a new one. So that was part of your bill, I guess. I mean, you didn't put it on the bill, but it was a service that the light company did.
Did they change the fuse at all, or?
Well, they were all screw-in fuses, which we bought at the hardware store. I don't recall it. They're not different than if you're familiar with an automobile fuse, you can see a little window there if the fuse is blown or not. Mm-hmm. Those are much smaller fuses, but these were the size of the base of a light bulb, and you screw them in. And of course, electricity would have to go through, and if something that was the weakest link in the chain, so if it heated up too much, the fuse link would blow, and then you'd get another one. Now we have circuit breakers that, when that happens, they pop, and you just pop them back, so you don't have to change the whole circuit breaker. But you did that. I remember Dad would go to what was called a beer depot. This was, it was a drive-through arrangement. Not that he was a drinker, but he'd get a case of beer about every month. So we go in, give him the key. The guy would open the trunk up, and you get another case of beer. So you took the cardboard case back along with the bottles, which were all recycled, for the next time around. And so that was a drive-through. That was pretty fancy drive-through arrangement. The guys would take care of you. You'd have to get out of the car. That was neat. But I'm trying to think.
So what was that?
I'm trying to remember if beer was carried by grocery stores, and I'm not. I'm going to say no. Initially, I don't recall. But the beer depot had to be in competition with something else. I mean, Must have, yeah.
Well, I mean, was there a lot of beer or alcohol accessible?
Don't really know.
Do you remember seeing a lot of people drinking?
It was a social act, just like smoking. It was a social activity. I mean, half the smokers smoked because everybody else smoked. Otherwise, if they'd known back then that might not be healthy, they wouldn't have. But so I think a lot of alcohol was consumed. That of course that weren't around when prohibition, excuse me. But if you ever read anything about prohibition, there was a lot of booze coming and going, regardless during what the year was, whether it was legal or illegal.
Yeah.
The juice flowed. Yeah, and it was accessible. I mean, some great stories about driving across Detroit River with a car or a truckload of beer, and the ice being too thin, and losing the whole truck. So, and probably illegal to start off with. And they'd water stuff down. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it was awful.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was,
remember,
things come in spurts,
Yeah, I remember reading one story once where someone, there's one city that was so poorly regulated, the police were so corrupt.
Yes.
This woman put a sign over her door that said, "This is not a speakeasy."
Right. Yeah, speakeasies. Again, that's part of the 20s. I don't recall any. Well, we're busy with school and doing things. One of the things I did with my dad, he taught Oriental art, as I said earlier, and he used it many times in his classes or lectures. He'd have they had 3.5 by 4-inch glass slides and a slide projector. So I'd be his projectionist. And Dad always liked to have the whole projection of the image to fill the screen. Mm-hmm. He hated having, you see something on a big screen or a screen bigger than the projection. Well, move the projector back or something. And at any rate, so I always had to make sure we did a good job doing that.
Yeah. So what was it like when, or where were you when World War II was declared over?
Well, let's see, born in 39, so that came along soon afterwards, so I didn't know anything about it, at that age.
Yeah.
And when it ended, we were in Hillsborough, because I remember we climbed Stowe Mountain. We're on a mountain arrangement up there. So I guess it must have been a lot of the people from the village climbed the mountain. We had a huge bonfire on top of the mountain to celebrate. So,
and you weren't really aware of what was going on because you were
not too much. I mean, when I went back to I got to go back and forth between Hillsborough and Ann Arbor. In Ann Arbor, riding my bike, many times I go on the week, Saturday matinee to see the movies. And during the war, there was always a newsreel about what's going on in the war to try to show. And I do remember it promoted our successes with our battles that we had. We didn't get into the much, I don't think, into the disturbing images kind of thing. I maybe remember one or two, but I was always had a newsreel about how the war is going, and then you'd have the main feature or a few cartoons, and then have some popcorn, and then hop on my bike after the show and ride home. So, but that was very common, and so it wasn't. You didn't know about it, and all that you. Sometimes without realizing it, all that effort went towards what we call towards the war effort. I mean, they had savings bonds they'd sold, and the government did, and there were posters all around encouraging people to buy savings bonds. We were recycling without calling it recycling, whatever you could. You didn't go on long trips because you had to have gasoline. In order for us to come east during the war, we had to get gasoline was rationed again because they needed the gas for the war effort, so it was rationed. But because we were raising a victory garden, we got gas rationing, so we were able to drive from Michigan to New Hampshire and back.
And that food, the victory garden, that was just donated?
Yeah, we would drive home with a trailer loaded with vegetables. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember one year we lost a bushel of turnips, which little Langdon, didn't worry about because he didn't like turnip. But, and we always would drive going to New Hampshire through Canada. And then going home, you cannot take, even today, you cannot take vegetables into Canada. They'll confiscate them. So we had to go down through Ohio, Columbus, and then up into Michigan. And if Ann Arbor's not too far from Detroit, so it wasn't too much further doing that than going straight across. But we had to do that.
Going to Detroit throughout your youth?
We did occasionally.
Okay. A lot of people nowadays know it as a kind of like a really crime-ridden city, but do you remember what it was like?
Well, we always went to the Ford Museum, Henry Ford Museum, which I check out. They have a beautiful locomotive. Ever in Detroit, they now call it the Henry Ford instead of the Henry Ford Museum. But it was acres and acres. And one year, Mac his dad took him to the museum as a birthday present, and he could bring one guest with him, so he invited me to go with him. So that was great. We enjoyed that. And if I'm near Detroit, I'll always try to swing by there. I went down for my 50th high school reunion, and flew in a little early so I'd have time to check out things. And it hasn't changed. I mean, it has all kinds of stuff. It's like Smithsonian museums in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Great thing to do. I mean, you wear yourself out, but you're never going to see that kind of stuff except for in those kinds of places. Or it's lots of little museums around you can pick up here and there. But so we went to. My dad had a friend in Dearborn, Michigan, a potter, who had worked for friend Henry Ford, Jack Foster, and so we would go and visit them. But that's not the city per se. And the Detroit airport is now actually in Ypsilanti, which is halfway between, but I mean, it's closer to Ann Arbor. Ypsi's closer to Ann Arbor than Detroit, but the airports was, they made B-29s there at that time.
So you did you ever get to go around on the B-29s, check them out?
No.
Okay, so what was so after World War II was over with? What were the 50s like when you were a teenager?
Well, 2 or 3 things came along. Of course, I'm not sure when the interstate highway system began. I think Eisenhower was the president at that time.
Did they call them Ikeways?
Yeah, well, so we saw the New York State Thruway built, and they did it in sections. It's obviously for that many miles. So some sections, as they were finished, they opened, so you could get on it and drive that, 50 miles on that, and then back to Route 20. So they sort of parallel each other. So it's, maybe it's 25 miles apart. So, and that's the same everywhere. You just, so anywhere you were going, you just didn't have those quick, fast roads. But as those were built, the automobiles were becoming designed to go faster, and were becoming bigger and heavier. And then the 50s was the pre-50 vehicles. A lot of them had kind of roundish fenders. As they progressed, they had open wheel wells, and then they got them enclosed and smoother corners and rounder corners. But they were all kinds of like boxes, So then they got more creative, and then we came in that rage with all the fins and the high fins and chrome and big tail lights and long cars and big heavy V8 engines. Oh yeah, I forgot what gas cost. Not much then. So, and much bigger tires. The whole vehicle thing was heavier, and the war was over, so that effort was changed over. I mean, automobile factories and manufacturing factories changed around and were manufacturing guns, ammunition, trucks, everything, again, for the war effort. So you could not buy a car I mean, they made maybe a few cars, but not many cars were manufactured through those years.
Yeah. So they talk about the 50s as kind of being car culture, the birth of rock and roll. Was rock really big at that time? Like, was it starting to blow
Kind
up?
of starting. I was not much into that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember some of that.
People were also making film companies were making more teenager-focused movies, like Rocking Around the Clock.
Yeah, that's right. Movies were
Were those
and big, but the big shows. Say the big shows. South Pacific, and that many of these were and still are stage shows, but they're also movies made with that elaborate dancing and big bands and just a whole. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Just long movies, but and so the theaters drew a lot of people. Again, that free TV. So, but I'm sure that as television came in, it was a bit of a hit to movies, but then of course technology got better, so they could do things that still can't quite do on TV. But now there's not much difference except for you don't have the theater. You're sitting in your house. Yeah. So theaters were much more elaborate and much more plentiful. I mean, around here, many of the old theaters have been restored and some have been lost. Our Ioka is going to become a apartment building and stores, but in other towns, Rochester have restored the theater, and some of them they've really done a beautiful job in many of those places. It costs a lot of money. Manchester, yeah. So many towns have done that. They've done many of the meeting halls back years ago would have stages, and they would let down a curtain, which basically was advertising. I don't know if it's traveling artists or who it would be, but they would actually do advertisements of stores in that town. So this was like I'll say, it wasn't a slide curtain. It was kind of a protective curtain, because you didn't always have a stage show. But if you're going to have a show, then that would be rolled up or down or something. So, and they've been restoring many of those.
And so that's where you go if you wanted to. If you were new to town. But
Yeah. Of course, many schools had cafetoriums.
Yeah.
Just like Lincoln Street School, there's a stage that the students could put on a show, and so they had that ability there. Or used to be, still is now. I was going to say the old high school. We've got a stage in the gymnasium. I had to hesitate there because at one time they took the stage out, but it's come back.
So were there like dance halls or certain places where everybody gets?
Oh yes, I don't. That's kind of pre my time or around the time I was born. That a lot of Rockingham Ballroom still exists.
Yeah.
Manchester, there was a big dance hall. Had to be some in each city. Must have had 2 or 3 dance halls, it's like the casino over in Hampton. But you didn't have the concerts that happen now with thousands of people. I mean, these might be hundreds of people, but not thousands of people. But they'd have dancing I don't know if every night, every Saturday, certainly every weekend. Yeah, and entertainment. And then you had, I'm sure, the big bands used to travel. I mean, they'd hop in something and move to the next town and for the next show. And
would people find outside of like theaters and venues, were there things? What were some of the other things people did to get together and socialize? Like, would somebody have a bonfire or set up a game of something or a table? Whatever?
Well, you always had sports. I mean, back to U of M, you had the Big Ten, so they had football. We lived maybe half a mile from the stadium, so when a game was going on, you heard the crowd roared. You could hear it where we were, and we'd park. I think we could get 8 cars in our driveway for 50 cents a car because we were an easy walk to the stadium. We thought that was great, and then my dad had made a board up like a football field, and we used figurines to follow the game. To State Street was all residential. The other side of the state was the U of M's field house and all that stuff, where the marching band practiced, so we could hear them playing many times when they were practicing. And then when football games are going on, which would bring a lot of people. I mean, the Big Tens would, whoever was there, people followed the games the way they follow sports today. They still follow the Big Ten today, but they weren't huge money makers that they are today. Yeah.
So we're gonna now get into the '60s. So rock and roll's taken off. Cold War's been declared and going on.
Yeah, I know.
Do you remember when the Cold War started?
I do vaguely.
Was it a big deal when you heard about it? Were people shocked?
Well, it just, as I recall, it kind of evolved and developed, and each nation was looking at themselves, saying, "Well, what do we got to do to protect ourselves if we're attacked?" So, military were increased in I'll say worldwide. Many negotiations going on, a lot of kind of pussyfooting around because you didn't want to upset another nation, and not sure what they were going to do, how they're going to make decisions. But it just seemed to go on and on and on, and finally sort of phased out. But
what about the Vietnam War?
That was an interesting one. That was when I was in. Where was I? Oh, we were in Buffalo at that time, for the most of it, part of that. A lot of resentment. I got to back up first, though. When I was in Ann Arbor, this had to be during Korean War. There was a young man living in the house next to us who was a conscientious objector. And what those people could do is he served and worked at the local hospital or the university hospital for 2 or 3 years, same as if you had been drafted. I think drafting was a 2-year minimum, maybe 4 years, to any rate. So I didn't think too much about that, but there were many people during Vietnam that would just sneak into Canada somehow, just leave the country so they wouldn't be called. Very emotional in terms of, and media had to have something to do with it in that people were better aware of what was going on. If I back up, I was talking about going to the movie theater and seeing these news strips. There wasn't TV, so you didn't have nightly news on the progress of whatever the battle was or the situation was. But there was a lot of objection to that. And we had Kent State was tear gas, and some people lost their lives. I was taking classes at that time at State University of New York in Buffalo. I was working at State University College at Buffalo, but I was doing my doctoral work, I'll say across the street, across town. And I know a couple nights I would go to class and you had tear gas on campus. I said, "To heck with this, I'm going to go home." So I'd turn around and go home. I also, during that time, had gotten involved with another teaching program because I was in industrial arts. It was starting where industrial arts started changing a little bit from more of the project-type approach to a greater, broader information about how man makes things, either through construction or through manufacturing. So it was like a 7th and 8th grade program. One was the world of construction, and the other was the world of manufacturing. So for that, I was asked to be, for Buff State to run a program, because the program required by the publisher that the teacher be trained to teach using this method, to the point that they were required to do that. So Buff State was going to do it, and I was going to head that up, which I did. But we went out to Ohio State for a week, and some of the things we were going to do didn't happen because of, again, campus demonstrations or tear gas or whatever. So we did what we needed to do, so we got what we got. got what we needed in order to do that. But I remember that. So,
Was it normal for these, like at every college, for these demonstrations, or?
I think so. I'm going to say I don't recall much happening at Buff State, but colleges and universities had young people who said this isn't right. Okay.
And did it get violent?
Yes, yeah, Kent State did. Yes.
Kent State did. It was
Yeah.
the only one.
They brought the National Guard in or something, and no, there's. I just remember Kent State maybe because of the publicity on it, but there had to be some other in California. I mean, come on, there was some real objection, public objection, demonstrations.
Yeah.
Not only just universities. I'm sure there was a march or two on Washington, or 3 or 4. I don't know how many. That's always something that when there's enough concern, enough people get together, then you're going to see a march in Washington.
Yeah. Okay. So is there? I know the civil rights movement was also happening. Was there a lot of public demonstrations too going on, like in?
Well, that's always part of what's happening. I got to back up to Vietnam for a minute. One of the saddest parts in my mind is when our servicemen and women came back. They were not welcome back. I mean, they really. They were there to do a job, and they did it.
Did anyone talk?
But because people didn't want it to happen, they got the reputation. They're like the, like, don't get me, I'm the messenger. They were kind of like that. World War II was a big celebration. If you had your sailor suit on, you were recognized no matter where you were. That was not the case when Vietnam ended. Not at all. Very, very sad. And I don't know, I can't say it was mixed with the racial situations at that time, because that became more obvious, I'll say, or public in my mind certainly after World War II, because even during World War II you had separate Negro sections, or
and that's what they called it. That was just what people with black skin were called back then.
Yes, yep.
There was no African American. It was just Negro.
I was just reading it. I get the Saturday Evening Post, and a little article about Negro cowboys. Well, you never saw Negro cowboys in any of the westerns. Those are the big things. You go to the theater, go see the westerns, and there were quite a few of them that had somehow gotten into that occupation, if you will. So that was what the article was about. So, but I don't think they went through maybe when they came into the towns, they had that, be careful what they did. But at any rate, but that whole movement, which is still going on, it's interesting and sad too that it takes so long for a change to happen. But it's an interesting thing. You've got to try to be very open and accepting and interesting, because there's a lot of interesting things that happened in people's lives and the history of their families and where they came from. So, at any rate, but difficult things. And I'm sure that, I'm sad to say, in a certain extent, politics these days, you see marriages break up. You see good friends break up for no good reason, in my mind. People can't agree to disagree. But that's another whole topic.
Did you see that more back then politically? People with opposing ideologies?
I didn't, but of course I wasn't. What? Experiencing any of that, I guess, would be. Mm-hmm. Ann Arbor, we had sections of town that black people lived in, and my first job was in a drugstore. And they have all kinds of children coming in and deciding how they're going to spend a nickel on candy, penny candy, And that was a long process. It would take 5 or 10 minutes to decide how I'm going to spend my 5 cents, because we had this and that. But they lived. We weren't segregated, but birds of a feather tend to flock together, so they tended to live in a couple parts of town together. But I don't know. We typically had white neighborhoods and what we call black neighborhoods. But there had to be a blend in some places. I'm just not sure there would have been. But I didn't, as I say, and I think part of me is because of my dad's occupation in terms of the Oriental art, because he spent 15 years in China after he graduated from Harvard. And so you're not only talking about art, but you're talking about culture and how people live, and having that base at home. My folks had friends, all kinds of friends, because again, the university that was a big university at the time, all kinds of people studying, Indians, American Indians, Asian Indians, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, Korean. You have a blend of those kinds of people. So that was common in my life. Many times he'd have students with the same kind of things. And Dad was always open. He always had his classes over for coffee at the house once in a while. He didn't have the huge lecture classes.
Yeah.
Even at the university back then, maybe some of them, I don't know, but and then in 1948, 1949, June to June, my dad and our family went to Japan. Now this was after the war, in 49, and he was working for General MacArthur as a civilian, looking and going around Japan and finding various national treasures that may have been damaged in the war or weren't damaged. Either way, that organization, town, village, whatever needed to help preserve that, as well as help preserve cultural things like the folk art that people would do out of the homes, kind of things, not home manufacturing, but they would, and that was how they made a living. But that was part of the culture. So it's so much woven together, how people lived, and survived. So I guess my difficulty is understanding why people can't get along. That's another whole story, but at any rate, that's interesting. So, yeah, in the 50s was, yes. I got a quick story about my ragtop. Boy, did I think it was hot stuff. So Duncan and I decided we go to you asked about the drive-ins, or you mentioned sometime or other.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of drive-ins. They were always fun. Drive-in movies and drive-ins. So we went to the root beer stand, which fortunately you drove up. It was up on a little rise with the top down. We thought, oh boy, woo-hoo, Well, the battery went dead in the car. We had our root beer, but it didn't start, so we had to push it. Most embarrassing. But at least we were able to coast back and get it so we could push it to get it going. Pop the clutch and start it right up. Had one of those nice V8 engines in it, it's a Ford V8.
What movie was it they went to go see, if you remember?
Oh, well, that was where you would see that car was Jimmy Dean.
Jimmy Dean.
Jimmy Dean, oh yeah, oh boy. Yep.
So in the 60s, there was the explosion of rock and roll. There were hippies.
Yeah.
Were they a lot around where you were at the time, the hippies?
No. We saw them in the news because we had TV then, yeah.
Did you see...
They had a lot of, Woodstock was in there sometime, or they all, went to Vermont and, yeah.
What about
You,
what about
you,
rock music? Was that ever played frequently where you were? Or
not particularly, but I do remember, the Volkswagens and the vans, the little VW buses, all love and flowers, and yeah, I remember that stuff. Yeah, we never got it. I never. Some of my children, I think, went once or twice to those things because they were more of that
more of that generation?
that generation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
What about watching the moon landing? Did you see that?
Don't think so.
Don't think so. Did you hear about it?
Uh,
The next day after it happened?
I think so, but I can't. Doesn't ring any bells right now. So,
Okay. So what happened with you when the 70s rolled on in?
when which?
70s, 1970s.
Oh, 70s. Let's see, 70s. Okay, 70s. I got to think where I was. I was in Hillsborough teaching for 2 years, and I went to Stafford Springs, Connecticut for a year, and then to Ledyard, Connecticut, which is in the New London area, so a lot of Navy there.
Mm-hmm.
That was the 70s for the most part. Most of the 70s I taught driver ed and did my master's at Connecticut State. Um, got involved at that time in teaching with the Eastern Connecticut Industrial Arts Association, which was a neat thing in that it got us teachers together. Because typically your industrial arts teachers were single teachers. In larger schools, you'd have 2 or 3. You may have metalworking and woodworking and mechanics or whatever. So you'd have 3 different teachers, all part of industrial arts. Or you got into the general kind of thing where you had, and I was in Hillsborough, just one shop teacher, and so you had different areas in the shop. But we got together to professionally, if you will, to talk about, to talk shop, layout design, what you're doing with different things, any new projects, kinds of things you're doing. I always used to do a little production, like a mass production thing, like a notepad, so the students would get involved with planning it out, designing what we call jigs and fixtures to put wood in to drill a hole or to shape it so they all come out the same. And then when you actually got into the day or two of production, somebody might be absent, so they understand somebody's got to, this isn't going to work right with this station empty. We got to, how are we going to take care of that? So, so that was sort of a movement. Something I was trying to do to try to get more information and knowledge about how things are happening and built. Never did many field trips. We did some later on, though, because of what eventually happened is I came across a little brochure, a 5-fold thing, about a plastics technology institute in Menominee, Wisconsin. And they wanted to get industrial arts teachers from different states. So I was selected. It was a great deal because it paid our way out. It gave us stipend for myself and family, and for 8 weeks, and food and lodging. I mean, it was a deal. So, and it was great because there were 24 of us from 24 different states. So we had a lot to talk about, just the differences in our states and how we work and things like that. I mean, we had one guy from Kansas whose family was in custom harvesting. So they get, when the wheat started getting ripe, they'd get a combine, 1 or 2, and trucks, so they could truck it from, and so farmers would hire them, and they work their way up, all up to North Dakota, and then they'd sell them to Mennonites or somebody up there. Then the next year, they'd start again and do that. And so...
Who are the Mennonites?
Well, like Amish and different, they accept machinery like that and will use it. And of course, I think buying used is, I mean, it was used obviously, but it was in, I guess, good condition. I mean, they must have also had a little, maybe trailer home with them they took with them. Anyway, it was the whole family deal kind of thing. So I was talking to Gary and talking about fields that we hay with rocks in the fields and going around with them, the horses and everything. And he'd talk about, well, we'd pull in and we'd lay out a little section first. I said, how big is a section? 40 acres. So, I mean, talk about black and white. I mean, completely different. But at any rate, that's a little side note. So then I came back from that and brought plastics technology into Connecticut, into the industrial arts program. So I shared that with through our professional groups. And we did do field trips because Thermos was in Norwich. We were in Ledyard, and Norwich is a city close by it. So Thermos had a company there. So we go up and visit Thermos company and give them different samples and things from them to show the students to work with. And so again, that started some of that thing. That's partly my interest in this in the Curriculum Industrial Arts project of looking at construction and as one thing and manufacturing is another one, because I got into sections where we talked about labor and negotiations and designing production lines and all those kinds of things. So that was part of that transition. And the result of that was I got an opportunity to go to State University College at Buffalo, which is part of the State University system, in their industrial arts department. And we were there for 7 years. But things changed in the fifth or sixth year. Colleges started programs called industrial technology, which it catered to the same young men back then. Maybe a young lady once in a while, but very rarely.
When did more women start getting in?
Well, more as we've gotten into the technology phase of it. I say the technology phase. Because you're getting into engineering now, and we don't have woodworking as such. But we've always worked with this whole business about, math, science. Come on, how can I forget what the big deal is now? Because we've always done it. We always did problem solving. You had to use your brains to figure out something mathematically or somehow be able to envision it. You always had to use English. You had to use some scientific principles. But we didn't focus on those skills, but they were taught through the process of creating a product or whatever the case might be. At any rate, so that's how some things have changed there. It took years to get there, but we're getting there. And now, of course, these evolved now into tech ed, and then you have your engineering, pre-engineering, and all those related things, and the understanding that credit can be earned. I remember we're talking in Dover. We're trying to working with the math department and the drafting guys and gals, that you can learn math, and you are learning math as a drafting student, but you had to demonstrate those pieces of proficiencies, what we call them now. So the math teacher said, "You're right. You're teaching math. Good. It's applied math." Yes, it is. That's the other discovery. Applied. In the last 5 years or more, everybody's getting excited on the academic side. I never look at it that way, but it's better. But I can remember my father-in-law. He taught social studies, and he loved doing different things. And students would act out something, or they'd go on a field trip to see something, and they did things rather than studying the book and doing the tests and drawing pictures. And although drawing is starting, it gets there to lay out where the Battle of Shiloh was or something. Shiloh, I should say. Anyway, so at any rate, but putting action into the learning as part of the process. So anyway.
You do all the hands-on.
It just, it's interesting how that changes and how the world changes. But it's still, in my mind, I'm still very interested in how man does and accomplishes what he does. I mean, just that if you look at submarines and aircraft, how do they work? And that much weight, and when these refueling craft come in to land, and you hear them, they look to me like they're just going about 3 miles an hour. And what keeps them up there? I have no idea. But anyway, they're just so big. But and here's somebody at the controls, yeah. But at any rate, it does just interesting to see all of that happen. But so 70s was like that. Of course, everybody had TV. We when we moved to Ledyard, we lived in a development. Not that developments were new then, but that was an area where there was enough population, partly because of Navy base, to build, I don't know, 60 homes in one area with different styles. They're not all cookie cutters, but different styles. And there was a whole new section of town that was built. So, as everything, and as the population expands, everything keeps going faster. There was always, the well-to-do people, and always, I'm sure, the poor. And homeless, but you didn't see the homeless as you do today.
Yeah. They start that population blow up in the 80s.
Excuse me?
Did that population blow up in the 80s?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What else? The 70s, end of 70s, because end of 70s we came here to Exeter, 73, 74, somewhere along there. And at that point, New Hampshire had the regional vocational education plan, where large schools, it was called a 20-center plan. It still is called, I don't know the state law, 1883, 18833, at any rate, which created funding for the regional vocational schools, which were a part of an existing high school. This is the initial concept of it. So that you had, administratively, you had a principal and you had department heads, and you had this vocational department, which is a new department. Not new, but large enough so there was a department head. But not all of them, in my observation, have been truly regional in nature. One in Exeter is. 6 different schools come here. Laconia is another one. Concord is another one. And Keene, I think, is that are truly regional. Now, Portsmouth is a regional center, but their district is their region. So it's not the same as what we're doing here. So at any rate, so my job was to see if we could get funding. Exeter had been chosen. I don't know how, but there's some rumbling about Winnicott wanted to be, or Hampton wanted to be that center. But at any rate, I guess the legislature of the gods didn't see it otherwise. So anyway, we had no center, but you had to go through a lengthy process. Because in New Hampshire, it was not competitive, but the legislature would only appropriate so much money each biennium to build them. So you had to have your plans in place, pretty much. I'll say more than conceptual, but not necessarily finished. So you had to have an architect. We had a general advisory committee, and I'd gotten about 200 people lined up for that. And with that, you had, or part of that were, and still exist, are what they call craft or advisory committees to each program. Craft being, or trade sometimes the word that was used. Trade is more industrial, but so building trades had carpenters, automotive had automotive technicians, also general contractors or business owners. Trying to get somewhat of a cross-section of the people that worked in that career path to help advise each committee, each program that represented it, Anyway, so we got, and then you submit the application to the state, and then they decided somehow which ones would be funded. Well, they always had more applications than money. And I think the legislature are the one that's figured that one out. I'm not sure just how, but and some places they tried 2 or 3 times. And, after you got a lot of people in the community all fired up about this thing, and you say, "Oh, sorry, we weren't chosen this year. We got to wait another 2 years." So you beat the drums in 2 years again to get everybody all together, and yet again you don't get selected. So, of course, they wanted to make sure the North Country got their fair share while the southern part of the state did. But so Berlin was one fairly early was approved. Colebrook never wanted to do it, except this current year they've decided they're going to build a center up there. So that's 40 years after the law was enacted. It's okay, the law is still there. So, at any rate.
Are you still involved with it to this day?
Oh yeah, I hang out there. I'm on the Agriculture Advisory Committee. Lions Club sponsors a scholarship there, yeah. And I try to be kind of a cheerleader for SST.
So what keeps you going with it? What keeps you motivated to stay on this, stay doing this?
Oh, it's keeping busy and keeping connected with what I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that school. I don't own it. The good folks in the state and Exeter, taxpayers, well, it's now under the auspices of the Cooperative Regional District. I was hired by the Exeter School District, so I'm still, my benefits are from that. But it's just, I like to see youth grow, and that time, in your life, from especially junior, senior, I mean, some people have a pretty good idea what they're going to do as freshmen. New Hampshire's mostly junior, senior, but now it's starting to start earlier. The biotech program here, you start as a freshman. You do get biology, technology, so that's a science credit you get through that program.
You see new opportunities.
But you're starting to see, and young people are maturing more, starting to think about, I got to go to work someday.
Was that never a thing when you were a kid?
And and then I've always said, take a program that thinks that interests you, and if nothing else, you're going to learn a lot of what we call soft skills. You're going to learn you should be able to speak. If you're going to work with it, many jobs you're going to work with a customer somehow or other, somewhere, in some capacity. You've got to be able to communicate. and if you're going to be on counter work, you're going to have to be strong, a little iron-skinned, so that somebody gets excited, you're not going to get upset. You want to try to meet their needs, and maybe you can't that day. I don't know, but and some good life skills. I mean, there's still a lot of things that are missing. I think just basic keeping a checkbook and cooking for yourself a little bit here and there, and making something, or keeping your car going. Of course, you can't do as much on the car as you used to be able to do, but how do you change a tire? Those are still basic life skills. And how do you get somewhere? And I chuckle a little bit. I mean, everybody uses the phone and Garmin to find out where they're going to go, which is okay. But what happens if that doesn't work? Do you know how to read a map? Probably not. So what is it you cut out and put in? And another one, the whole idea of social studies and civics. It hasn't been taught for years, but it's good practical knowledge that would help some people today to figure out where's first base here anyway. Where should I start? At least understand a little bit,
What would your message be for future generations with this?
Future generations. Well, I think you got to work and be safe and be healthy, and to be healthy, you need to respect each other. Mm-hmm. You have to learn to agree to disagree. That way you can keep a relationship going. Not that everything depends on a relationship, but rather than going off mad in two different directions, you say, okay, I don't really agree with John, but he has his opinion, and from my observation, he has reason for thinking that way. But at any rate, be involved in your community and volunteering in some fashion. I mean, I started back when I was through church, when I was in Ann Arbor. we were building mission. And so in those days, the membership did a lot of work on the building. We got old lights from other churches, and we had to rewire those, so we did that. We had to put the floor down, so we did that. So I did a lot of work with that kind of stuff, So volunteering is important to make a connection. And within that whole thing, you got, as myself, there's some connection with faith, whatever it may be. Some connection certainly with community. I do that a lot with and other people through Lions Club.
Do you think it gives them humility?
Do
you think it gives them humility?
Yeah. And variety. That's one reason I'm still connected with school. And community is very important to me. And I try to use the resources that are there. I try to, many times I feel I'm helping facilitate things. Yeah, why don't you get this for them? Or, hey, I know, because, SST, I'm talking with who's the park rec director? Oh, come on. Anyway, when they were putting the docks in down there by the new docks, I got connected with them about Lions Club, and we got together some funding to buy and have installed the cradle that fits in there for canoes or kayaks. And then he was saying, well, I'm hoping to have people use the river, recreate more often on the river. So I'd like to have, some, and now we have the dock and that, so we're going to need some kind of a rack. So if somebody comes in from out of town and wants to use a kayak for 2 or 3 days, they should have a rack to leave it on. So I said, why don't you check with the welding class? And so the rack they have now was built by the welding class. So anywhere the school and the town can get together, I think is great. So many times I'll suggest, well, why don't you talk to so-and-so? Or building trades. We don't build houses anymore, but they might put on a garage addition for you. Yeah. Or many times people will put a garage with a bedroom overhead. They can do that in the year's time.
And people find out they're more capable than they think they are.
Yeah. So there's a variety of things that way. So that keeps me connected. Obviously, planning board's there. The town did a lot for me while I was at SST, and that has evolved to a 26-year experience. So I think one of the things I certainly would have on that list is to surround yourself with good people. Yeah, I mean, it happens, and I know my experience on planning board. It's a board with good people who are doing the best they can, and we don't always agree, which is the way it should be. But sometimes before a meeting, I'll get a little, because I'm chair again, they keep electing me as chair. I'll get a little concerned, and my comfort is thinking, yeah, hey, the board's going to be there. It's a board that acts, it's not me. So, okay, then I'm relaxed because I know the good people are there. And I think if you reflect over your lifetime, if you connect up with good people, that'll help keep you on making better decisions on the right track. There's no guarantees in life, for sure. But what we do and what we don't do has a very, clear impact on what we do and don't do. But so, really, it's important to get involved, keep yourself busy so you're healthy, sane, and be careful with alcohol and drugs, because they do a lot of damage. And I've never been faced with that problem, but if that does not become a problem, then you can continue to grow. But again, that's part of it. I think surrounding yourself with good people in one way or another. So.
All right, well, thank you, Langdon.
Well, my pleasure. I hope you're getting what you need.
I think so.
Okay.